Welcome back to our Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit here at FreightWaves. Super excited to have you guys all here for this FreightWaves TV event. And of course, one of the biggest problems plaguing our small fleet and owner operators these days is the problem of where to park your truck. Definitely an issue that needs to be addressed here in the industry. And so to talk a little bit more about this, we've got Evan Shelley joining us for this fireside chat. He is the co-founder and CEO of the Truck Parking. And Evan, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this really important topic.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So Truck Parking Club sounds like it's a exclusive group, right? Like you got the kids to get in. Is that what's going on here, or what is Truck Parking Club trying to do for the industry?
Yeah, so there's no fees to be on Truck Parking Club. There's no, inherently with the word club, people think there's membership dues or things of that nature, but there are not. There's no fees to be on the platform at all. But we're working on, helping provide parking for truckers by monetizing locations for property owners. So we're helping create more supply of truck parking across the U.S.
So truck parking is one of those issues that is super contentious and is very difficult for folks who are part of that small fleet, or maybe they're their own owner operator, to really figure out, because they don't necessarily have the leverage, right? And when you go, you have the option of, okay, do I hang out at a truck stop? Do I maybe go and pull off the highway? Or do I go and maybe try and find something if I have to wait for a shipper or receiver to see me? Where do I park my truck then? How does Truck Parking Club look at some of these issues, especially if you're talking about in more urban spaces?
Yeah, what we always say is that Truck Parking Club is kind of the next option after, if the truck stop is full and the rest stop is full. Truck Parking Club is going to be that next option for you, because, we're not trying to say that we don't, we're just that next option, that because we do charge for parking. But I would say, as far as parking in urban spaces, I'm sure you've seen it in New York City. It's pretty wild, some of the things that they're enacting to keep truckers from parking in the city. So it's a huge problem, because people don't want it around, but they want the goods that come with it. So it's a very complex situation in the United States right now.
It's definitely really multifaceted, and bringing up the issue of the state legislation part of it. New York City, not the only place that has now put forth legislation to really kind of limit the ability of drivers to find places to park. We're talking about some issues going on in Minnesota. Minneapolis, St. Paul has some pretty big, wide sweeping legislation. And it almost kind of seems that state and local governments are maybe kind of at odds with federal government on this, because federal regulators working to pass money to support truck parking grants and actually see this funded out there. When we're talking about that balance between state and local, where does Truck Parking Club kind of sit in that space? Are we talking more about private funding for this, or looking at working with state and local governments to really support the development of truck parking areas?
So Truck Parking Club, at this very point, we don't really get involved in that capacity. We're not, out in any form of lobbying or anything like that, or talking with local officials about what, we believe they should be doing. We're not really doing any of that at the moment. I would say, as far as working, with state and federal governments, there's a lot of free resources out there that Truck Parking Club is actually taking advantage of, which is, kind of part of, similar to the grants that are out there now. There's been some pretty interesting things where you can tap into free data that states make available. So, that's a little teaser on like some of the things we're actually working on that will be on the Truck Parking Club platform, where we'll be pulling data that's freely provided from these various states and the federal government.
That public-private partnership is interesting to explore, especially when you're talking about looking at real estate spaces to develop into dedicated truck parking. What does that look like from a market standpoint right now, and the availability of real estate, and even the willingness of people to sell what they have to be turned into truck parking? Are you guys finding that to be difficult, or is there a lot of availability right now?
I would say where you need it the most, it is very difficult to find. And even for locations where it is zoned appropriately, you still have issues getting it actually permitted for truck parking, which is pretty amazing. But to answer your question, I would just say where we really, really need it, a lot of times it's not actually available to develop. And that's kind of what, our thought is. We're going to businesses that maybe a trucking company that has 10 extra spaces in their yard, but they're not openly advertising it. That's a way to create supply with actually having to go through the headache of, the municipality, the entitlements, the permitting process, and then the cost. The cost of some of this industrial outdoor storage is amazing what it goes for. And it turns out that, a lot of situations, truck parking isn't a viable business model at the price tag that you have to buy this land. So we at Truck Parking Club look at it a little bit differently, but we applaud anyone that's out there developing truck parking because, it seems like everyone's against them, but they're providing something that's very, very much needed.
And so with that, you mentioned some of these trucking yards maybe have a handful of extra spaces that aren't being used. And when you look at that, you can only assume that they're the bigger companies looking to offer their services to those smaller fleets, to those owner-operators. Is there some difficulty in getting those two connected? And that's where Truck Parking Club comes in, is making maybe some of those bigger spaces known to these smaller groups who aren't necessarily actively involved with them?
Exactly. So we're creating awareness of available truck parking that, was never available before. Because, my thought on it is, if there's 100 truck parking spaces a mile away, but the trucker has no ability to know unless they drive past the location, maybe see a sign, or they go to the exact, post or whatever to see that there's availability, then there's really no awareness. And if there's no awareness, it's the same thing as the parking not being available. So what we, really believe is that sometimes it's just an awareness issue, knowing that there's availability of truck parking. And like you mentioned, it's taking different companies and just we're helping facilitate, information about available truck parking from one company to another, where before there really was no way to do that.
Have you guys found any hesitancies yet of these places that are maybe larger groups that have these open spots being maybe unwilling to welcome newcomers in to use their space? Or is there kind of this sense of camaraderie in the industry where, some of these bigger groups are maybe a little bit empathetic and they understand and they're willing to open up their gates, open up their yards, and let some people who need to find that space?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a little bit of both. It's like when Airbnb started, no one thought I'm going to rent out a room in my house. But people adopted that, and we're seeing the same thing. Maybe it takes a few conversations with the right parties and they're like, okay, this makes sense to us. We'll open our gates to additional trucks. And then some people, very quickly adopt it. So it's a little bit of both. And ultimately, a lot of times the people that, reach out and inquire, end up coming back and they're like, okay, we've thought about it and this is something we want to do. And, there's an incentive, like you mentioned, like camaraderie, but there's also a monetary incentive, for companies. It's like, well, we have 5 acres of extra space that's sitting there. We need to monetize it somehow. And that actually may be down the street from, a trucking company that needs it, or it may be down the street from a bunch of owner operators that need space for their trucks. So it's a value add.
So you guys have been in this space for just a little bit of time now, and we've obviously seen a pretty drastic market turn really within the last 9 months, which has led to a lot of companies having to park their trucks, especially if you are on the smaller side. There might not be enough freight for you, and you just simply can't compete with your bigger businesses who are able to take those cheaper rates. When you look at the market, the way that the market changes, and we start to see more trucks getting parked, has that had to, or has that enacted really any change in the use of your guys' services? Has it really helped drive use and adoption of Truck Parking Club?
I would say, it's just like with everything in trucking right now, just prices are getting compressed. So you're getting squeezes from every direction. So ultimately what happens is the price of the truck parking goes down, which is, that is what it is. So that's really the only thing we're seeing. It's, one location is $200 a month. And then before you know it, we're getting tons of inquiries for $150 a month at a location. And to the point where finally the property owner's like, okay, maybe the new price is $150 a month if no one's willing to pay what we used to be able to get for this parking. So I would say it's a squeeze on prices. There are more trucks parked, but ultimately that doesn't mean that they're willing to pay more. I think everyone's well aware that it's tough out there for truckers currently in a lot of ways. So it's just economics. If you aren't making nearly as much money as you were last year, you're gonna find all the ways you can to squeeze out to be able to make it through. And I totally get that. I totally understand. So I would say, to answer your question, we're just seeing a shift in prices on spaces.
And so, final question for you here. When we're talking about all the groups that are on this type of platform and offering their space as a service, really, are we looking at any shippers and receivers getting into this too? We know typically a lot of shippers and receivers say, hey, you know what, if you're here, if you get here and we can't get you loaded, sorry, you're out of luck. You got to go find somewhere else to be for the night or for your time period, right? Are we starting to see any type of involvement where shippers and receivers get a little bit more receptive to allowing their space for drivers to sit in if they can't get loaded, and letting that be part of their platform as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's an interesting situation, and I would say we're having conversations with shippers and understanding, but definitely some hesitancy. There's still definitely some hesitancy to even take that on, but I do believe ultimately it will be something that a lot of shippers and receivers will provide. It's like we were talking about earlier. It's just wrapping your head around it and saying, well, actually, this is probably something we need to create as a process in our business. And ultimately, in a lot of scenarios, it's a convenience to the truckers that they should honestly already have. So I believe it will be adopted more and more, and we're having conversations currently.
Well, I think that it is a great idea and a great effort on your guys' part to make this more accessible and open to the industry. So thank you so much for coming on our Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit to discuss it a little bit. If folks want to reach out to you and maybe learn a little bit more about Truck Parking Club, get signed up and join the club, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can go to truckparkingclub.com. We have a Google app. We have an Apple App Store app. You can call 888-899-PARK. So that's 888-899-7275. We're on all the socials at this point, just Truck Parking Club on all the socials. So you can reach out to us on there as well. And yeah, that would be best.
Awesome, Evan. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll keep up with you guys soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you all for staying tuned for our Small Fleet and Owner Operator Summit here at FreightWaves. Of course, this FreightWaves TV event, you can catch all parts of it on demand if you missed any of our sessions from today. Find those on tv.freightwaves.com. Head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for our next FreightWaves TV event. And while you're there, get your tickets for the Future of Supply Chain. It's coming up in just a few short months. We will be in Cleveland, Ohio at the end of June. Stay tuned, stay active in our live chat, and we'll be back with more content.